All right, so for 35, we're looking at this sentence. Let's give it a read. It currently reads, "The designer envisions the game's fundamental elements, the settings, characters, and plots that make each game unique, and is thus a primary creative force behind a video game." So, as it is right now, we have a bit of an issue here at the end, and that's something I want to point out, is that right now we have this comma and when we have a comma and, that is a conjunction between two complete sentences. So if we use a comma and or a comma but, what comes before and what comes after has to be a complete sentence, and that's not the case here. What comes after here is not a complete sentence because you're missing a subject. Is thus a primary creative force. There's no subject. There's in this sentence there is no thing that is the primary creative force. So that means we can't have a comma here. So that pretty much eliminates A. So we can't keep it as is. Let's see, B, C, okay, those aren't commas. D, okay, for D we have a semicolon at the end rather than a comma, but this semicolon runs into the exact same issue, because to use a semicolon, you have to have what comes after to all, no, I'm sorry, you have to have both before and after the semicolon to be complete sentences, and again, that's not the case here. What would come after the semicolon, and is thus a primary creative force, is not a complete sentence because you're still missing that subject. So D is also out because this part is just not a complete sentence. So that leaves us with either B or C. And the only difference here is you're using the two dashes here, but the only difference is that whether you keep this colon or whether you put a dash. So when do we use a colon? When we want to either set up a list or when we want to in some way qualify what was mentioned before. So currently we have this colon and then the settings, characters, and plots that make each game unique. So okay, up until there it's fine, it's just a list. But then you still have this part coming after the colon. But this part isn't part of the list. So for this reason, you actually can't keep this colon here. If the sentence just ended after unique, that would be totally fine because you say elements and then you say the things that, what do you mean by elements? I mean the settings, characters, and plots. But is thus a primary creative force doesn't describe the elements, yet it comes after the colon, and for that reason, we can't have this colon here. So that pretty much leaves us with C, which is totally fine. If we just put a dash here and a dash here, that's sort of like, putting just two commas around something to designate, or I'm sorry, show that it is just some sort of descriptor of the noun that was mentioned before, which is precisely what we have in this case. And let's also remember that when we do that, the sentence should still make sense if you removed the thing between the dashes or between the commas. And that is also the case here. The sentence would be totally fine if you just said, "The designer envisions the game's fundamental elements and is thus a primary creative force behind a video game." In that case, of course, is would be referring to the game, the designer. So C is our answer here.